Hi, everyone. I'm excited to introduce my mentee, Hadassa K, who's a 12th grader here at SKA. Hadassa is a very motivated and bright student, and I've had the privilege of mentoring her over the course of this project. Hadassa has a passion for science and a drive to learn new skills. For her project, she researched Ozempic and its role in treating diabetes, which was a perfect opportunity for Hadassa to pursue her goal of further developing her love of science. Hadassa learned Python on her own through an online course and applied what she learned to analyze a real-world diabetes dataset. This hands-on experience allowed her to engage directly with her data, giving her a meaningful and personal role in the research process. Throughout this project, I was continually impressed by Hadassa's motivation and dedication to her work, and I hope you all enjoy her presentation.
Hi, I'm Hadassa. Next slide, please. So my mentor was Aliza Sagman. She was a scientific programmer at NYU Langone Health, and her research was focused on machine and deep learning applications for medical image analysis. She recently just moved to Israel, and she lives in Karmei Gat with her husband and one-year-old daughter. And in her free time, she enjoys reading, baking, and hiking. Next slide, please. So for my project, I titled it Ozempic More Than Just Diabetes, and I did research and also data analysis. So I specifically chose to do this because I'm interested in medicine and wanted to do some form of research and science related, but I also wanted to gain a new skill, and I've never really been exposed to coding, so I wanted to try something new, and Aliza is experienced and knows how to code, so she was able to help me do that. So the topics and technologies that I used was Python, NumPy, Pandas, Matplotlib, and Seaborn. And I used Google Colab to do the actual coding and data analysis. And after completing the Python Code Academy course to gain a foundation of coding principles, I went on and analyzed a diabetes dataset using Python and did further research into Ozempic and its effects. Next slide, please. So my magical experience, I really enjoyed getting to know my mentor. She was really incredible, and she was showing me all the different uses of coding. And as I said, I didn't really know so much about it, so it was very cool to see all these different ways that it could be used. And I really enjoyed getting to know more about diabetes and Ozempic. It was something that I was interested in learning more about because I kept hearing about it being used a lot and for different purposes, and so I wanted to understand the mechanism behind it. And I really enjoyed learning how to code. It was something I didn't know so much about, and it's a whole new skill set, and I was able to view all the information from a whole different perspective. The hardest challenge was probably going from the Python Code Academy course, where I was just gaining the foundation, and then moving to the actual skill set on Google Colab. It was very hard to like bridge that gap, but Aliza was really incredible, and she helped me figure it out and really apply the principles in order to be able to do more with it. And I really enjoyed being able to do the data analysis part, that I wasn't just researching facts and recording them, but I was really interacting with the information. And as I said, I was able to view it from a whole different perspective. When I was looking at graphs and different charts and data that I was creating, I could understand the information in a whole new light. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share some of my research highlights. And so the background of Ozempic is that its active ingredient is semaglutide, which is a GLP-1 receptor agonist. So an agonist means that it mimics the original, in this case, GLP-1 is the hormone, and it mimics the response of GLP-1. GLP-1 in general stimulates insulin. So when glucose levels are too high, it releases insulin and will lower the glucose levels. And as it does that, it slows gastric emptying, meaning the food will stay in the stomach for longer with the glucose, and therefore a person doesn't really feel as hungry. So therefore, if somebody is using it for not the purposes of diabetes, it'll cause them to not feel hungry, and that will lead to the weight loss purposes. And so as it works, the GLP-1 binds to the receptor cells in the beta cells in the pancreas. The pancreas is where insulin is secreted from. And therefore, when the glucose levels are too high, insulin will be secreted and it will lower the glucose levels. And just one thing I wanted to point out that was really interesting was that the effects for people that use it for whether they have diabetes or whether they don't have diabetes didn't really differ. So the different side effects of whether nausea, vomiting, any of that hasn't been significantly different for the different purposes it's been used for. Next slide, please. So here we have my actual coding, and we took this data set from the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive Kidney Diseases. All the participants in the study were female above the age of 21. So the first thing we did was we imported the necessary libraries. So imported pandas, NumPy, Seaborn, and Matplotlib. And once we did that, we were able to start exploring the data. And the first thing that we noticed was that there were some rows of missing data. So for example, for skin thickness, some of them had 0, and that would mess up the analysis. So we realized that we needed to get rid of that so the analysis could make sense. So we found the total number of rows, which was 768, and then saw that there was 376 missing rows. And we made sure that before getting rid of these missing rows of data, that the proportions of those of with diabetes and without diabetes would still be proportional so that the analysis could make sense. So once we made sure that that was possible, we were able to go forward and actually get rid of the missing rows, because otherwise the analysis could not make sense if there was missing rows or if there was not equal proportion between the two of them. So once we did that, we were able to actually go forward and start analyzing the data. And the first thing that we did was we compared the means of outcome groups. So we did for BMI, glucose, and insulin were the 3 features that I focused on. And as you can see that for BMI, it's not so much significantly higher for those with diabetes, but for glucose, it's much more significant, the mean value for those with diabetes versus those without diabetes. And the same goes for insulin. Those with diabetes had a much higher mean value than those who did not have diabetes. So this gave me like an overview of understanding the data through comparing these means. And I thought these features were important to focus on because they're important aspects of those who have diabetes. The next thing we did was we created a matrix heat map. This is a graph I never knew existed before this. So I thought that was really cool. And it shows all the different correlational relationships that exist between the different variables. So whether it's positive or negative, meaning it's a direct or inverse relationship. And one relationship that stood out to me was that of glucose and insulin, that for those without diabetes, the relationship was more positively correlated. So the two variables are more correlated. So I went further and tried to understand this relationship by creating a line of best fit. So we have a correlational relationship between them. And for the x-axis, we have glucose. The y-axis, we have insulin. And as you can see that for those without diabetes, the line is higher up and the two variables are more correlated. And so through my research, I realized that this actually makes a lot of sense because somebody who does not have diabetes, their insulin works properly. So when they have elevated levels of glucose, their body will just secrete the amount of insulin necessary and the insulin will work and lower the levels of glucose. But for somebody who is diabetic, whether it's type 1, so they aren't producing insulin, or type 2, that they have insulin resistance and it's not really working, there's not enough. So then the elevated levels of glucose can't really be handled and lowered because their insulin isn't working properly, and therefore the two variables aren't really as correlated. With somebody who does not have diabetes, the two things really do work together, and that's why it is much more correlated with somebody who does not have diabetes. So I thought this was a very interesting thing to focus on. And the final graph that I created is a kernel density plot that shows the distribution. In this case, I chose the BMI to focus on, but as you can see here, that for those with diabetes, there's a smaller range and the data is a lot more concentrated, peak is higher. So this shows us that people who have diabetes have a higher BMI. And it's interesting to focus on because Ozempic helps for the insulin purposes, but also for the weight loss purposes, because obesity is often a symptom of diabetes, that it can help them with the weight loss aspect, but also help deal with the insulin issues. So Ozempic can be used in both ways. And yeah, next slide, please. Thank you so much. Any questions? So the question was, if I've never learned how to code, like how was the whole process? So it was like a 25-hour Python course. So that taught me like, I think it went through most of the basics, but then it was, as I said, it was definitely like, it was a gap between applying like the basics to going towards that. And so my mentor was really helpful with that. And she was showing me how to apply it. And like we would practice one and then I would be able to do it again and create it for my specific data set. But I spent the most time definitely on the coding piece of like learning how to do that. a lot. That was like the biggest focus of the whole project. Yeah. Um, I would want to be able to try using the coding in a different way to maybe like in this case, I focused on only making graphs, but maybe to like analyze it in a different way. I'm still very new to how to code. So, but I want to go further in the coding piece, not as much in the research, but just seeing other ways to analyze it besides graphs, I think. Yeah. What made you want to do what? So I chose to specifically do
Could you
this.
please repeat the question? Could you please repeat the question?
So the question was why I chose to do my project on this. And I felt like I kept hearing a lot about diabetes and Ozempic being used. And so I wanted to understand the whole mechanism behind it, like how it worked and why it works this way. And so that led me to do the research part. And then because my mentor worked with coding, she influenced me to try the data analysis part of it, which was also really cool and learning how to code.
Data to uncover things that weren't being studied in the selection, I mean, studies where the data was brought in and it gets posted. Would you like looking for unique queries or correlations or?
So the question was about how I like analyze the data set. And so the focus was a little bit just learning how to code more than like specifically what study. So we just chose a basic study that like had been done. And we worked on really just applying the coding steps to understanding the study kind of. So it wasn't as much as we were focused on the outcome of it, but using it to understand the means and all of that. But that wasn't really where I was getting my information from. I was using the data set more for the coding purposes and like the research part was separate than that. I really enjoyed the question was what I enjoyed more, the coding or the research. And I really enjoyed the coding part. It was very cool. It was totally something new and I really enjoyed it.